Today we're going to be doing some talking about our Bromeliads, and we're going to be focusing on Neoregelia this time. So Neoregelia is a nice genre of bromeliad, and it comes in all shapes and sizes, whether they be little itty bitty tiny minis, which form beautiful big baskets. I'll use this one soon because it's got columns, but little tiny Neoregelias to the giant, large silver montanas or great whites or gigas, lots of different ones. But the thing about Neoregelias that's common amongst all of them is the spines on them. And they have different forms of spines. They can be just a few spines, or they can be a lot of spines, big spines, small spines. Either way, if those spines scratch your skin or they get embedded in your skin, they can lead to an allergic reaction. A rash will develop, especially for those that are handling a lot of the bromeliads throughout a day with open skin. And so once that's occurred, lots of moisturiser, clean your skin, give it a wipe down with some sort of disinfectant afterwards, and put something on to help calm it in nice cool water. If you do get a spine in, you can remove the spine using a pair of tweezers. Don't go digging in them to try to remove them, or covering with a band-aid, and the band-aid will help draw that spine out. And that's the nurse talking me. Okay, now let's get back to these plants. Neoregelias, a couple of things about them that we come across quite often is disease on them and insects on them. So disease is usually a bacterial infection which occurs in the vase of the plant once the plant has matured and flowered. It's very distinct, and I'd love to show you one, but I don't have any because I've treated everything for it. But it's very distinct because it leads to a dark band around the bottom. Oh yeah, there's one. So this one's been treated, but it still has a little bit of vase spot. So we'll start with this one. So it's got a lot of dead leaf matter around its base. It's been very wet here in southeast Queensland for several months, lots of overcast days. So the plant's not getting a chance to dry out, even though, as you see behind me, they're all on tables or they're elevated to help with their drainage. So I've put a few tips before in videos on stabbing them to release the water, raising them up, putting them on pots. But once they've got this dead leaf matter around the bottom of them, you really do need to remove this, because this is your bacterial load that's going to introduce your vase rot to your plant. So they do need to have all of the bottom removed, cleanly working around in the order that the leaves are produced. Otherwise you end up with broken leaves around the plant, and they're a lot harder to remove once they're broken off and they're little tiny pieces of the plant. So you want them to be nice and clean all the way around the bottom. That's what we're doing with this guy. See what happens when you break it off? You end up with these little broken leaves. If they stay on the plant, they're right at the root or the base of the plant, and that's where the rot then will attack the plant. So working around methodically, as I've said before, when it comes to removing leaves in the order that they grow, and taking off all of that dead leaf matter. Now say you've got a leaf up higher, not down the bottom of the leaf base, that you want to remove, or even some of these tougher ones. What we can do is we can split the leaf down the centre, separate it and remove it left to right. So taking a leaf like this one for example, which is 2 leaf wraps up from the bottom, running a fingernail through the leaf until it breaks, or a knife, and once it breaks, tearing it off into 2 pieces. That way you've broken the leaf as far back as you can, but it also cleans up the plant, and any lower leaves are still left behind, so you haven't changed the shape of your plant too much. Alright, so we got rid of all of those lower leaves. Around the bottom of this particular one, which is enchantment or Lennox enchantment, around the base, that distinct brown around its collar gives you an indication that those plants have been affected by collar rot or root rot, most likely in this case collar rot because of those dead leaves, and so it needs to be sprayed with a fungicide. So Mancozeb is one option. It's a pretty potent one, and one that I don't like to use. I like to use Searles Trifend. Trifend is also used for cleaning your tools, bacterial-wise, keep them clean, so does alcohol, and also insecticide, fungicide and bactericide. So it's an all-in-one, which is a good product that I like to use, sparingly, but when we've got a lot of rain, we don't have an option. Another thing people often see on their bromeliads during warm weather, depending on the plant and whether you're watering with tank water or with rainwater. Good luck with mum. This is a little guy, much easier to handle. You might find some white deposits on the tips of your leaves. It's like an algae, but it's a calcium deposit. It comes from your water that you're using. So it can be rubbed off your plant. This particular leaf shows it quite clearly, that white deposit. It can be rubbed off and your leaf's lovely and clean beneath it. It can be washed off with a soft cloth, moist soft cloth, just to make your plants look a little bit nicer. Alright, which brings us to the next part, taking our pups off. Neoregelia pups grow around the base of the mum. They don't tend to grow too high up into the mum unless they're growing like on the bottom leaf axils around the mum. And you can easily remove that bottom leaf and get to your pup. Now if mum has died, just completely remove mum. And if you're lucky and you've got a well-spaced couple of pups, like this guy's got, technically I could just remove the mum and leave the 2 pups in the pot to continue to grow. This little one has got pups growing right on the edge of the pot, and they're not going to fully develop. These are pups as well. The mum was in the middle and she's died off completely and has been removed. So these little ones need to be removed, and that's when you need to select your tools, people. So we can use our sharp saws, we can use a sharp serrated garden blade, a serrated knife. One of my favourite tools is an electric kitchen knife that's rechargeable, or a reciprocating saw. Depends on the size of your mum that you're cutting and your pup. And then for your little ones, your little minis, if you're lucky enough and they're growing on a stolon, then you can use a pair of secateurs to simply cut the pups off following the stolon, and just do a cut and keep a little bit of the stolon so that you can dig it back into the potting mix or into the pot itself. And with these pots, if you continue to remove the old mums from the centre and then replace with a young pup, the pots will remain full all the time, and then you end up with such a big display. Alright, so we've taken off our pups, cut them off, sawed them off, whichever you like. Make sure you've got a nice firm heel. If you break them, you risk snapping up here, which is the growing area of the plant, which is the meristem. You risk losing that pup because it will start to rot out and you'll pull leaves out from the centre and you know that plant's done. However, if you do snap it off, and I'm not going to snap one because I don't want it, but if you snap it off and you've got an open vase Neoregelia that's holding water, or an open vase that is holding water, pop your pup inside it, and there's a particular enzyme that lives in the well of Neoregelias and other bromeliads like in Alcantarias that will encourage development of roots in a really short period of time. Now, light requirements is another question we constantly get asked, and that's really difficult because not only do people grow in different environments, it's also the intensity, the duration of the sun. It also is how long the plants are exposed, and also the breeding of the plant and how long they've been in your environment for. Several years of being in the same position, the plants will become accustomed to a particular kind of light. Now, if you do happen to see them, because when we do move them around, even just a few meters changes their light intensity. It can do a couple of things by changing the light intensity. It can cause them to bleach, like my beautiful lavender lady has done. So this was an intense purple colour, and it's now a muted purple colour instead. That's because I moved it 5 metres out of the direct sun and into an area where there's a little bit more shade, 80% above me, a little bit more shade, still plenty of light, but I just moved it 5 metres to give it some protection, and within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it began to fade. It's not bleaching, it's fading. It's just because I've changed its position. So I'm not changing its position again. It can stay here and acclimatise to the less light and more protection because it did bleach while it was out in the exposed sun area. Started to bleach just when we had a few days of actual sunshine. A couple of plants do not like any kind of sun. Not direct, not indirect, no sun. Complete shade. Malbec, beautiful dark plant, is one of them. Your really dark plants, other than the Duke, which is back there, and I'll go and get it because it's a completely different feeling plant. Malbec is rather softish to feel. It's sort of like a Barisha in its texture. So it's quite soft, and so it's susceptible to changes in temperatures and light. This particular one I treat like a Barisha and keep it more in the darkest area or even below my shelves. So I layer plants depending on their light requirements from up above all the way down to the ground. So Malbec is one that over the years I've discovered where it likes to grow, which is just behind me, and it doesn't like to be moved ever. If I move it, it'll bleach. Now, that's a young Malbec that hasn't quite come into its coloration. Here's a flowering Malbec, and that's the kind of colour you're looking for, that gorgeous red. So if you're seeing these sort of reds, and there you go, lots of old leaves around Mum, she's flowering too, so I could hybridise with her, but why improve on perfection, to be honest. Taking away the leaves, they're just very easy to remove on this particular plant. Now, I'm noticing while I'm doing this that there's a little bit of scale beneath this plant, and they have already been treated once, but then we had a lot of rain, and so it indicates that I need to spray again, and I don't spot spray for a single plant. So beneath it, after removing those dead leaves, I can see soft scale on its base. So you can rub soft scale off and kill it, and you can treat it with a little bit of dishwashing soap and a cloth and rub it all off, or like I do because there's so many I need to spray. Right, so Malbec does not like sun, not direct at all, doesn't particularly do well with it. It will turn green, a horrible muddy green colour, so it's not a pretty colour for such a beautiful plant. So it stays in its same position, and that's where it's going. Once they find a good position, that's where they stay. Now, another thing that we find is some sun damage, spots of sun damage. It normally occurs on a very pale plant. Sorry, I'm going to have to move down. Lorenalecta. Beautiful, beautiful plant. Can be grown two ways. Can be grown in high light and it will just blush pink on maturity, or in a more shaded position it stays this beautiful butter colour, which I prefer the butter colour. Now the problem growing it with this butter colour, or the very light colour, is its susceptibility to sunspots in certain areas of its foliage. Areas where there's still been water left on the leaves, and then the sun finally comes out after 3 months of rain, and we finally get sunshine. And so in the plant itself, within its leaves, just come across a leaf that's really too tough to split, and that happens because it's still alive but it's dying and it looks unsightly, so I want to remove it. The thing is, you only have to do this a couple of times. Rightio. So, such a beautiful buttery colour, but it got exposed to just enough sunlight to cause just a single burn on its leaf. Unfortunately, once that's happened, you can't do anything about it. The damage has occurred once you see it. Usually you'll see it 2 days after the sun has gone away again, or a couple of days after the sun finally has come out. And so once that occurs, unfortunately, you can split the leaf and remove it if it bothers you. You can cut around it if it bothers you, or you just have to accept it's happened and you just continue to grow your plant the way that you normally do and just accept that it's got a burn on it and it's not going to be a perfect plant. Now in this garden there's a lot of not perfect plants. Nobody has 100% perfect plants all the time, especially in a large garden, and especially if you grow lots of different varieties. Okay, so we've talked about some diseases, some different scales, soft scales, hard scales, or fly speck, and you can treat them using chemicals, obviously, an insecticide, something like Trifend or Conguard or Confidor, if you can still get Confidor where you are. It used to be our go-to, but it's gone now from us because it's deadly to bees. Alright, so I'm just going to take off all these leaves because we don't want to leave any debris around the bottom, because then that will lead to the rot that we don't want to see. Alright, all cleaned up, close enough. Needs to be sprayed, but everything's going to get sprayed, so that's fine. I don't mind that. I'm just going to take off that one final dead leaf. So I've taken off quite a few leaves off this one. Gives me a good chance to inspect the plant to see whether anything else is going on, because that scale can be quite damaging to the plant. And so making sure it's really clean, and just any dark spots that I am seeing are just dead leaves, so I'm not worried there's any rot in this plant. It's just got some scale that's left over because of the weather that we've been having. All cleaned up. I could top it up, stabilise it back in the plant, in the pot, produce some skewers. I'll just top dress this one with some potting mix and no fertiliser for this guy. It's got enough in there already. Now let's talk about potting mix. Free drainage, open, bark, maybe a little bit of fertiliser when they're younger. When these guys are potted up, sure, bit of fertiliser, slow release around them. Because they're young, that's okay. Just a little bit, just a teaspoon around the top of the pot is all that's required. Plant it in the centre of the pot and allow it to establish is all you need to do with that. Now, as I said with the pups, once a mum's been removed, finding your pups and just splitting them and pulling them off, not something I recommend. You can twist them and pull them if you're really game, but I don't particularly like doing it. I prefer the safe method of either secateurs or cutting them. Don't want them overcrowded. They like good airflow. So unlike bilbergia who like to grow in clumps, Neoregelia seem to like to be on their own a lot of the time, but can be used as a landscaping plant depending on its variety. Something like a Nick Williamsite, a very old variety, anything that has got Johannes in it, grows huge but does well in a really big clump, and you just simply need to keep removing the mum. This particular one is Valentine's Day. It's a lovely plant. Again, doesn't mind a bit of light, it doesn't hate direct light onto these leaves. The ones you'll see fading out the most will be anything to do with your reds or your pinks or your purples. They prefer to have some kind of light, but not direct light. I'm going to make my way around to the Duke. Now the Duke is a different kettle of fish altogether. It likes sun. The Duke is very hard when you feel it. It's got a hell of a lot of spines on it as well. But it's a very hard, rigid leaf, even though it's still flex. It's very tough. You can feel how tough this is, and it has an awful lot of spines. It used to be a thing going around years ago, the more spines it had, the more sun it could take. No, not true. It just depends on the plant and how long you've been growing it. So initially the Duke here is the seedling, or a pup I should say, and it's been growing under 80% shade hot. It needs to be moved gradually. Usually in autumn we do it before the hot weather begins. Moving these plants out over time, we call it the Bromeliad migration, as we move our plants out, and then as winter approaches we move them all back in again to protect them from frost. It's just what you do when you're growing plants under shade hot, and it's a collection of plants versus in your garden. You want to stuff for your garden, look for your really tough plants or your older varieties, your Eekmeas, your large Neoregelias. They love the sun. Silver Montana loves the sun, can't give it enough sun. Tiger Rose, which is a very pretty middy Tiger Rose. Tiger Rose actually needs more sun than I'm giving this one. This one's getting a little bit too much shade and it's bleaching out a little bit, but it just needs a little bit more sun, and it tolerates a lot of sun for a short period of time. Morning sun, not over the top direct. Midday sun, and it can tolerate some afternoon sun if it's a little bit filtered. So light requirements is the one thing we get asked when it comes to Neoregelia. My plants are bleaching, it's summer, what do? Do I put a topper on? If you're going under something like an 80% shade cloth, doesn't normally need it. You just need to lower your plants down, or put another plant that's larger that tolerates the sun above it to create a canopy. And I think that pretty much covers everything. You're most susceptible to your sunny, your lighter varieties, your over-hybridized varieties, or your reds, pinks and purples. You need to be aware of that, but they still need some good light in order to bring those colours out. So 80% where I am, because this is westerly exposed sunspot. Currently I look really shady. That's because it's overcast. It's always overcast here. When they do start to fade, like this guy, which was beautiful and purple a few weeks ago, lovely lavender colour beneath it, but it started to fade unfortunately, and that's because I moved it from a really open garden again, because summer was coming, so I moved it in too quickly, and I moved it 5 metres in one go, and so it changed rapidly. So here you can see there's more light at the front of these benches than there is towards the middle, and then the westerly sun comes in from that spot in the afternoon up high, and it comes down on an angle directly on top of these plants, which is why this is 80%. During summer, if it gets really bad, there's a topper that goes over this as well, but I haven't had to use it so far, fingers crossed. So that's my little talk when it comes to a few tips and tricks about Neoregelias. There's a few things that you also have to do. Please name your plants if you've got them named. If they're not named, they're annoyed or a no identification bromeliad. If it's a well-known Neoregelia that's been documented for a long period of time, you might be lucky and get a name for it. Someone might go, yep, I know exactly what that is. But something like this, which is a new hybrid, this is Neo Rose Kingfisher, Neil Baines hybrid Neo Rose. It looks a lot like a lot from that Grex. If it lost its label, then I wouldn't know what that was. So I use a garden marker. This particular one is an art line marker, 0.8 millimeters, that's quite fine. Easy to write your labels for your tags and dates, etc. on the backs of them. It's UV resistant and fade resistant. This particular pen, I've seen tags that are over 10 years old. I've been using it for about 6 years and none of my tags have faded. Unlike something that's been written with a Nico pen that fades away, and even though it says permanent marker, there's not a permanent marker when it's used in the garden. Will fade away and become just a whole heap of dots, and you're going to play join the dot and try to find the name of a plant. If you haven't been lucky enough to take a photograph of your plant with a tag so that you know exactly what the plant looks like and its tag so you can rename it. So keeping our plants named is really, really important. This particular one, like I said, is faded off, so I'm simply going to write its name on the back, which is Cheeky Pink. That's not going to fade, unlike that side. Put your tags down really low in your pot as well, so that they're not exposed to light. It's also another good way to grow them. And also, the best tip that I was ever given when it comes to tagging plants is always put one in the bottom of a new pot with the name of the plant that you're planting in it, in case you have children or grandchildren or young people that come along, or birds that like to steal your tags. If your tag is completely missing from your pot, and then you lift your plant out of the pot, you've got its name underneath it. I don't like writing on pots themselves. Some people do. I don't do that because I'm repotting them constantly and I've got all these paint pens written around pots and it does my head in if it's not the actual plant inside. So I'd suggest just getting the right pen. And that, I think, is enough to cover Neoregelias. Like I said, every size, shape, colour, form, different light requirements. If you bring a plant from a nursery or if you buy a plant, you can always ask them how long they've been growing them for, how long the duration of sun is, and always err